Hello, and welcome to Gav Connects. My name is Marilyn Abad-Cardinalli, and I'm here at Cal State University, Monterey Bay, in the World Theater, where I have the great honor of sitting next to one of the most distinguished, award-winning journalists in America.
Oh my.
Miss Belva Davis.
That was a big scope there you gave me.
Well, it's absolutely true. You have become an icon, I think, in journalistic, the first African-American woman to become a television news anchor. And you've written a beautiful book here, but I'm going to let you talk about it. They don't want to hear me repeat what you are going to say. So we're going to have a conversation. Yes?
Okay. I like that.
Good. I want to ask you just one question to get things rolling. Why did you even want to become a journalist?
Boy, now that will take up your whole program time,
Really?
but I'll try to shorten it.
Okay.
I'll try to shorten it. I was in, I worked for black newspapers. I worked for black program radio stations. And through volunteering, I got chosen, being the only volunteer, to go with our news director to the 1964 Republican Convention at the Cow Palace in San Francisco. I had such a horrific experience there with racism and all of the other things that make your hair stand on end, that at the end of that whole tabloid, I was convinced that journalists, at least in those days, had a great deal of power. They'd been very important in reinforcing the images of discrimination from the South during the early part of Dr. Martin Luther King and the leadership from the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. And, you know, showing the dog attacks and the hosing and all of that had really made an impression. And so I knew the power of the media. The media was disliked intensely at that meeting. We, as black people, were not welcome there. We were not granted press passes to be there. We obtained some admission seats in the gallery from a top black Republican. And we're getting along pretty fine. It was a raucous, out of control convention most of the time. The whole crowd was set off by remarks made by, of all people, the very calm and beloved former President Dwight Eisenhower. And there were words that were inflammatory to this group. We were soon discovered. We were pelted with whatever people had in their hands. We were called the N-words and other words. And eventually the crowd got so out of hand near us that my news director and I decided it was really not safe to be there, and we started trying to make our way out, for which they followed and taunted us and so forth. Well, after that experience and having seen what had happened to John Chancellor, who was then a revered news reporter, he'd been arrested on the floor there that same night, I reflected on what had happened to us, how Chancellor had the power of a network behind him, a huge audience to tell his story. I would only be able to tell my story, maybe to other blacks who expected probably no more than what we got there, and I decided I wanted to have some of that power. I wanted to be a television reporter, with no rhyme or reason, so no experience, no education, no anything. I just knew it was a center of power and that it really could do an awful lot of good for powerless people, and wanted to be part of it.
This is part of your being involved in the community. I mean, you've worked with some very prominent black Americans in the media, but there wasn't anyone to give you a leg up, other than you'd say you earn the respect of a lot of the folks that were working in the media. Men.
Right.
Men.
Absolutely. And I must say, there actually was another woman in the U.S. that was on television then. There was a woman named Joan Murray in New York. And,
New York.
I was then hired. I was west of the Mississippi. I had all that territory to myself.
That's true.
And amazingly enough, you know, Los Angeles, where you'd think this kind of a cultivation of a talent would have taken place, it was really, I mean, I helped in getting the first woman hired in the Los Angeles area. But it was a a lonely position, so to speak, but one that was worth every sweat, tear that I shed to try to succeed. And I always felt that I was walking into another culture. Therefore, I had to be somewhat tolerant, because I was the intruder. And not that, when I say intruder, you know what I mean in the conventional sense. So I tried to learn as much as I could about my colleagues. I tried to learn the language of the game and, you know, just the habits and the way people behaved. And it took that up on, and I think, for whatever reason that I made that decision, it was the right decision.
It was.
Because I don't think a combative attitude or a complaining one or any of those things would have worked out at all. I tried hard to build respect from the men that I worked with.
And did you do that? You did that all without the internet. I mean, you said you did a lot of research now. I mean, things have changed from back then now. I mean, just by being in, but you said volunteering. You said that you did a lot of volunteering. Where did you volunteer? You did radio as well.
My first job on radio, let's see, did I only got from Jet Magazine, which was a big deal. I was a stringer. I was paid $5 a week. From my radio work, I sometimes got my 25 cents bridge toll. To cross the Bay Bridge, it used to cost 25 cents. So sometimes that would be my expense account.
Oh my goodness.
The number of times I crossed the bridge. So I concentrated upon the getting to an objective rather than how much was I going to be paid to help me realize my dream. Because the dream payoff was going to be big time, because it seemed impossible. But I didn't let salary ever stand. When I was hired even as a TV news reporter, I actually did not know what my salary was. And it was some months later to the shop steward, union shop, great, thank goodness, still love AFTRA, came to me and wanted to know what I was being paid. And I told him. And he, being shop steward, knew that the guys were making twice as much as I was. But we didn't have to take any action to correct it. It was as though management just needed to be reminded. Really.
By the way, we should be paying this woman.
That's exactly what happened. I was just called into the program manager's office one day and said, you know, by the way, we really owe you more. We're giving you a raise. We're doubling your salary.
It's a little different than what we're hearing today for people are trying to do this to us. You overcame a lot of obstacles, though. You shortened it for us, but you did overcome a lot of personal obstacles. And if you got 25 cents for bridge toll and you volunteered, how does one survive? What kind of clever ways did you devise to, say, feed your family? Because you had 2 children, you were a single mom. And in your book outlines some of the challenges you had personally.
Oh, they were not easy. I worked temp. I several jobs. I'd get $5 here, $10 there, but mostly the backbone of this whole business of trying to break into the media was on the back of getting temp work, and I did. I worked for one agency, Manpower, that kept me going. And so they provided the seed, but sometimes the work was slow. Those are the times when food was scarce. There were times when we really did not have sufficient food. We lived for just a short time off of, thank goodness the seasons were right, off of the bounty of my best friend who had 6 children. I only had 2, from her garden. And from that garden, she had a bumper crop of tomatoes. My son hates tomatoes
to this day. Not the mozzarella salad fella. Wow. Well, that resonates today, doesn't it? I'm thinking things might be coming around. Let's see. I have another. You have many experiences in your book. But what do you think was your greatest learning experience, that one that you think has keeps you kind of moving forward today?
Over a career that's gone over 40 years, it's hard to. I would think it would be silly to think I could pick one. There were milestones along the way, And they were, I learned from different people in different circumstances. When I was in high school at Berkeley High, I went to Berkeley High, I had an experience that really was part of the cement that put my life together. I lived in Berkeley, Berkeley High student, bowled on the Berkeley bowling team, wanted to be an expert bowler, thought I could be a 300-point bowler. And so I went to the Berkeley Bowl one week on a weekend and tried to bowl. And I won't get the long of the story, but the short of the story was I was told by the man behind the counter that I couldn't bowl there. And I felt helpless because I was a kid. My family was not an activist family, so I came up with another way to learn to be a championship bowler. I drew a diagram on my driveway, and I measured it all off, so it was like the lane, and then I used canned goods from our house for my bowling pin and my bowling ball, and I practiced there. Until one day when one of my gym teachers came by and saw me doing this. She wanted to know, what are you doing? And I said, well, I want to be a bowler. And she said, well, why don't you just go to the bowling alley? And I explained to her that because of my skin color, I was not allowed to use the bowling alley. And her famous words were, I'll see about that. And I used to hear those words whenever there was a tense moment and reflect upon her style, because what she did was simply to go to our principal, explain what had happened. They mutually decided they would withdraw all of the Berkeley high school programs from that bowling alley unless the policy changed. So the policy changed. And when I think of the power of one person to change that, she changed the lives of many people by just breaking down that racial barrier. And so I call it my power of one lesson, that one person acting, with rational solutions and alternatives can create wonders, and dedication to knowing that they're right too. So that was one from a teacher that went with me in my teen years. And by the time I was there were many lessons, but this one stands out because I applied it to my television career. I was in radio, and I was sent out. Why, I don't know, a black radio station did they send me to the Cow Palace to interview Frank Sinatra, but they did. Did they? And of course I got there, and I was the only person of color, I was the only woman, and Sinatra was up to him as to whether he wanted to talk to all of us or one of us. He elected me out of that group, much to the chagrin of the very professional press card carrying men, knowing I did not have one because they didn't give us press cards.
So you were the only woman amongst all the men. And Frank Sinatra selected you.
Girly.
Girly.
He did. And so, I got in and I did what any inexperienced person would do. I was shaking. My hands were shaking. I was nervous. I was really not making sense until he finally just reached across the table and put his hands on mine. And he looked me in the face and he said, let me tell you something. The first time I walk out on a stage and I'm not nervous, I quit.
Wow.
So when I would get very nervous later on in my career, I'd remember Frank Sinatra. He's not going to walk off that stage. So it's all right to be nervous.
Yes, it is.
It's all right to be nervous.
Turn it into a positive energy.
That's exactly it.
So we learned something valuable from a teacher, and we have something valuable from Frank Sinatra. That's wonderful. Do you want to give me a third?
Well, there's a third one, and it's totally in another field. This is later in my career, and by now, the whole issue of AIDS and gay life is coming. And I learned a lot from great journalist Randy Schultz, who wrote the book The Band Plays On. And he showed such bravery in being the first gay man to appear, and he was the first in the country to appear as a television news reporter. And he was outed by a very conservative senator live on our show. he didn't back down once. He didn't deny that he was who he was. And I think, and as we moved along and we started to cover the AIDS crisis, I learned from that community as it was learning, because death was the end answer to this. A bravery that I had not experienced close up. I felt that kind of bravery must have gone on in the South during the depths of the civil rights movement. But here were people facing up to this disease, trying to figure out how to corner it, how, along with that, to embrace their lifestyle, not to deny who they were. And I think I learned a sense of honor and dedication to self from that whole. It was a long experience from a number of people, led in great part by Randy's example.
It's wonderful, but that's probably because there was something inside of you that connected to what he was doing, to believe in yourself. I mean, that's what I'm hearing you're saying. I went online now, you know, and I typed in your name, and there was, in fact, I typed in questions to ask Belva Davis.
Oh my!
Yes. So
it's there?
It is.
Oh,
well, there's this, and so one of the questions, I thought I was coming up with this great revelation of a question, Belva, but I said, is there a question out there that you want to make sure you answer in front during this interview? Is there something, you know, you yourself are an interviewer, you prep things, and I explained that our audience would be probably, hopefully, young men and women who are listening to your life and saying, well, now can I do this? Can I follow my dream?
Now you've come to the one question that motivated me to really write the book, because my early life, it contains the incidents, a long list of stereotypical things that happen to children, especially from poor neighborhoods, minority children from poor neighborhoods. And I try to use those markers that many use to say, you're not going to amount to much because of this. You know, born to a single mom, given away at birth, never having a permanent place to live, sleeping on the floor most of my life, not being able to get a college degree that I so badly wanted, and living in the housing projects. It just goes on. I mean, the things that some want to use as an excuse for not doing their very best, regardless of the circumstances. Those are the people that I would like to speak to. Not saying that today's world is not tougher than it was when I was growing up. I had, even though I had no permanent home, I had a sense of community. The black community embraced all of us kids. My neighbors embraced me as the people down the street. It was my girlfriend's mom who substitute mom for me when I needed it most. And so I just want to say, look, that's what happened to me then, but this is what happened to me the next 40 years. None of it was easy either, but I was able to do that 40 years later because I learned to expect as much as I could give of myself, and I tried to give as much as I was given. So if you start out with this challenge of trying to survive in this century with its mountain of problems, with all of its indicators. Remember, I was born in the first real depression. I was born in the 30s. And that was not an easy time to be black or to grow up a girl in this country.
That's true.
And so my challenges were different, but in terms of what it cost you in your stomach to absorb that and then get up the next morning and say, hey, we're going to do this again. Those things still matter. And so I want, if nothing else, to share that early history and maybe to impress a little bit by some of the names of the people that I've had an opportunity to get to know along the way.
I know. It's I was like I said, I hope everybody gets a chance to read your book and just be amazed by what you did go through. And it must have been hard to put some of that down.
Very hard. But, you know, when I think back, I covered some of the biggest stories, really, of the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and I'm still working. I'm still hosting a program.
Yes.
I met some of the most influential, I met presidents. Martin Luther King is, Malcolm X. I mean, interviewing Muhammad Ali.
Didn't Malcolm X point you out like the person that he wanted to?
No, he put me through an exercise.
That's what it was.
To this day, I don't know if it was a joke or if it was real. I was working for a little black-owned paper, and my editor was a former AP reporter, white, who had just visited one too many bars and ended up working for a small paper for practically no money. And we were in our office one day, and Malcolm X and some of his, lieutenants or helpers came into our office, and my editor went to the desk and called for me to come, and I came out, and Malcolm X was there. First of all, I had to get over the trance I was in, because he had a stare that was like steel, and I had, these green-gray eyes or something like that, light eyes, which are unusual. And so the whole thing is that the man with him told my editor that Malcolm did not talk to white people. Been called out so that he could find somebody brown to talk to. And so I said to them, you have your own newspaper, why do you need us? Well, what did they want us to do? Run a long story, not pay anything, not edit it, and not talk to the guy who could decide. So I simply turned, after they told me he didn't talk to white people, and said to Daryl, Minister Malcolm X wants to put some material in our newspaper, and he doesn't want it edited, he doesn't want it cut, and he doesn't want to pay for it. Can we do that? Daryl said, well, we'll be happy to run it, but I don't know if we can run all of it. I turned to Malcolm X and I said, he'll be happy to run it, but he doesn't know if he can run all of it. And then they said to me, well, we don't want him to edit it. They don't want you to edit it. Well, anyway, this whole thing went on, and finally it was resolved when Malcolm X finally said, well, he would edit it himself. And he turned it over to me, and they left. And I could almost bet there were giggles when they got out.
Oh, okay. Oh, wow.
When they got out the door.
Well, then tell us about Martin Luther King.
Well, he was a man I revered so much. It's hard, it's hard to do anything.
We all do.
Inhale when you see him. You're not breathing. But the radio station I worked at, one of his best friends worked at that station, a salesman named Frank Clark, and he used to come into our station after hours. And I had two jobs there. I was a disc jockey, and I was a traffic manager clerk. So it meant I was always there late at night. So I would be sitting in my office sometimes when they would come in. Generally, I did not say anything, but on one occasion, Frank brought him to my door and said offhand, "Belva, you know Martin, don't you?" No, I mean, went downhill from there. But in any case, there was an introduction and a handshake and with some small talk that I can't recall. But the real day that I had an experience with Dr. King was a day in Oakland where he was at the height of the Vietnam War protest movement. And the singer Joan Baez had been arrested and was in Santa Rita prison. And she had visited him when he was in the jail in Montgomery. And so I'd been told that he would come to visit her because she visited him. I was waiting at Santa Rita for that to happen. There was a long process that they sent us through, half the day, before he finally got permission to go in. But when I finally did, he was sitting in the car trying to get him to talk to me, and I have a picture that I value. The pictures of King sitting profile, straight away, eyes very intense, white shirt, tie, and you see this female hand reaching in the car window with the microphone. I know that's my hand.
You know it too.
I know that's my hand. And I know, too, it was a day that I asked a key question that made the national news. And so,
What's the
so I
question?
remember that. Well, it was at the time he was saying that his approach to nonviolence had to be escalated. He didn't say to violence, but he said it had to be escalated. It had to be taken more seriously, because Stokely Carmichael, who then led this group called SNCC, and other younger Turks were moving in, saying that this being a pacifist just wasn't working, and it was disturbing to him, and he was disturbed by the Vietnam War. But I think that day on his face, this was in January, and he was assassinated in April. He was very heavy laden at that point in his life.
Yeah.
And I feel very fortunate to have, I did finally get a real interview following that.
Oh, okay.
But I was fortunate to have had that experience. You could see his mind churning.
Yeah. Worried.
Looking for directions.
Oh.
Yeah.
Wow. That's fabulous. Well, you've given us so much in the time that we've got a chance to speak with you, Belva. Do you want to just give that one piece of advice that you wanted to make sure everybody walks away with after they watched our interview?
Well, it's every place you'll see an interview with me or see an article about it. I try to include this little phrase, and only because it was so valuable to me in life. It's not poetic, but it served a purpose, and it's something I wrote when I started the battle to get into television, to keep my spirits high. And it was just a few words. Don't be afraid of the space between your dreams and reality. If you can dream it, you can make it so.
Never in my wildest dreams. Belva Davis, thank you so much for sitting down and speaking with us today. It's been an absolute honor.
And a pleasure for me.
Oh. Thank you very much. It's Marilyn Abad-Cardinalli saying thanks for watching Gav Connect.